While we all agree that hostage-taking is an offense of grave concern to the international community, the taking of Canadians as hostages by foreign states and terrorist organizations has persisted at alarming rates. We know all too well the story of the kidnapping of Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor, who continue to languish under deplorable conditions as hostages of the Chinese Communist Party. Sadly, their abductions, far from being isolated instances, are part of a broader trend. In 2015, Abu Sayyaf, a terrorist organization in the Philippines, kidnapped Canadians John Ridsdale and Robert Hall. They were both beheaded the following year. In 2008, Ottawa faced 5 hostage situations in as many months. Melissa Fung in Afghanistan, Robert Fowler and Louis Gay in Niger, Beverly Giesbrecht in Pakistan, and Amanda Lindout in Somalia. Despite these numerous hostage takings, and despite ratifying the UN Hostages Convention in 1985, Canada has done shockingly little to address hostage taking and hostage diplomacy. Obviously, Canada's strategy for dealing with hostage takers is deeply flawed. According to an op-ed in the National Post by MLI Senior Fellow Sarah Teach, Monk Senior Fellow Shuvaloy Majumdar, and co-founder of the Canadian Coalition Against Terror, Daniel Eisen, it's time for Canada to take a new approach. We cannot afford to give in politically or to pay ransom, as doing so would only further encourage hostage taking. Instead, the authors argue, we must pass new legislation to combat this behavior. Such legislation must offer mechanisms to punish those who engage in hostage taking, support the families of victims, and coordinate with our international allies. As a first step, the Canadian Coalition Against Terror and the Macdonald-Laurier Institute have jointly released a paper that proposes specific legislation to do just that. We have even gone so far as to put together a first draft of what the legislation could look like. Policymakers are more than welcome to copy it. The proposed legislation has 3 parts. The first part would empower the government to impose sanctions on foreign countries and foreign nationals that take Canadians hostage. Canada already uses sanctions to deter human rights violations, but the existing legislation does not specifically cover those who take Canadians as hostages. The second part would ensure that the families of hostages receive consistent and reliable support from Ottawa by imposing obligations on the federal government to communicate with the families, direct them to appropriate resources, offer them support, and help them to get relevant information from any foreign national or state that is unwilling to share the information with them directly. The third part of the proposed legislation recognizes that like-minded countries must work together if we want the best possible chance of getting our hostages back home safely. It would empower the Minister of Foreign Affairs to offer monetary rewards or asylum to foreign nationals who provide information leading to the release and repatriation of Canadian hostages, thereby encouraging local support in our efforts. For too long, policymakers have sat idly by while the safety of Canadians all over the world remains at risk. By introducing this workable and substantive legislation, we can discourage hostage taking and better protect Canadians abroad. Given that the legislation is already drafted, Ottawa has no excuse. Its first duty is to protect the lives and freedom of its citizens. Canadians held hostage abroad must know that the federal government will do everything in its power to rescue them and bring them home. I'm Brian Lee Crowley for the Macdonald-Laurier Institute.